So, hey guys, post-editing Zyme here. I want to apologize for my voice in this video, and I know it sounds really weird, but for some reason it sounds like I sucked reverse helium before I recorded this video. Don't know why, but it sounds like I'm trying to impersonate Corpse himself. And yeah, it's not that bad of a change. It just kind of, for some reason, I think my microphone messed up and it happened. So I'll let y'all get right to that and experience it for yourself.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Ethan or Dr. Zyme here, and welcome back to another episode of Nightmare Fuel. Now, y'all really enjoyed the last one, so I figured I'd go ahead and do one now. If y'all don't know what this is, it's basically where I sit down and we together read out some horror stories and we kind of react, give our thoughts and opinions on them. It's a very fun series. Like I said, you guys really enjoyed the last one, which is why I'm here doing it again, even if it's taking me, 3 months later. I also do, for extra information, I do have a Christmas edition one coming out on Christmas Eve. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And without taking up much more of y'all's time, let's go ahead and flip off this light. And if I can reach this one, this light right here, and let's get right into it. So the first story we're going to be reading is called The Path. It was written on December 1st, 2020 by Nora Redding. They walked the path because they had always walked the path. This year there were 9 children, swallowed in coats of gray, slogging through drifts of soft, powdered snow as the ball trees stood sentinel. They had come a long way, almost halfway up the mountain, yet still the path twisted forward into the distance as far as they could see. They weren't permitted to speak, but the same thoughts were stirring in every one of their minds. At least, Michael hoped this was so. He couldn't possibly be the only one with questions about where they were going and why they needed to be silent, and why a tear had slipped in the corner of his mother's eye as she carefully tied his red scarf tightly around his neck. Those were the forbidden questions. Questions that were met with frantic gestures to be quiet and fearful glances out the window. Those questions were draped in black. But Michael thought them all the same as he walked the path, his footsteps swallowed by the snow. His nose was as red as his scarf. He was sure of it, and his breath came out of his mouth in misty plumes that drifted through the strangely pale, bleached sky and dissolved into nothingness. He knew the group of children walked the path every year on the day of the first snow, and that this had always been so, but not much more than that. The details were shrouded in secrecy, just as surely as the path was shrouded in winter. Michael stumbled over an unseen root, falling on his hands and knees. The other children didn't look back. That wasn't permitted either. Michael watched as blotches of scrubby purple spread over his frozen palms like an ink spill, and fear coiled deep in his chest. Though he didn't know why, he stood and hurried to catch up with the other children, his feet sinking deep into the drifts of snow, deeper than they should have. The usual sounds of the woods were smothered by the profound chill in the air, leaving nothing but an oddly breathless silence, as if the very earth was waiting for something. Someone. The peculiar fear in Michael's chest wedged tighter into his small ribcage, winding up his spine with an uncomfortable prickle as he slogged onwards, legs aching with the cold and exertion. All he wanted was to be back at home, sitting in front of the small fire. He breathed in the cold air, and it seemed to coat his lungs in ice. The path would lead home, or where else could it lead? And he could curl up with the blanket and forget about all of it. Forget about the naked trees that seemed to watch him. Forget about the peculiar silence. Forget about the dried up looking sky. A sharp crack from just behind him made him stop short, and the fear tightened so suddenly clutched his chest. The other 8 children stopped too, stepping from foot to foot uneasily, but they didn't turn around. Nervous energy filled Michael's veins and made him want to run and hide or fight or something, anything but keep walking forward like nothing was wrong. But he knew that once you stepped onto the path, there was no stepping off of it. Those were the rules. Those had always. Soft click, 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 echoed oddly in the quiet as the children pressed onwards through the snow. Michael was sure it had come from the forest, but he'd been instructed not to take his eyes off the path. The coiled fear lodged in his chest and clawed its way to his throat. In curious hopelessness descended on him like molasses. His numb legs moved of their own accord, dutifully placing one foot in front of the other and moving forward up that cursed path for what could have been forever, or perhaps a few minutes. Here on the mountain, time had lost its meaning. Michael kept his eyes forward, not just because of the rules, but because he was starting to fear what he might see if he didn't. His heart pumped erratically in his little chest, and he was quite sure that one of the trees had moved. Click, click, click came again, but this time it wasn't soft or distant. It sounded as though it had come from just barely off the path and grated sharply on his ears. Michael was scared, terrified, in the raw, hiccupy way that only children can be. His breaths came faster, but the thick plumes of fog coming from his mouth nearly obscured his face entirely, giving him a peculiar blurred appearance that none of the children ahead would ever see, because they were obedient. They kept their gaze forward. The children followed the rules because they trusted their leaders. Michael trusted his leaders. Surely they wouldn't lead him into danger. Surely they would keep him safe. The thought comforted him, like a hot coal nestled in his belly. And when the next click, click, click came, he hardly even shuddered. And when a tall, impossibly thin creature stepped, bow-legged out of the woods, and picked up the first child in long, thin fingers, he looked around wildly without thinking, because surely this was not supposed to happen. Surely the village leaders would step out of nowhere, smiles in their faces, and declare this is all a big joke. And yes, they could go home now, and sit in front of the fire wrapped in a blanket for as long as they pleased, sipping the broth made from last year's spring onions, and talk cheerfully about anyone to hush them. But he did not see the village leaders. All he saw were more of them, eagerly clicking long, spindly fingers together. And when the creature unhinged its jaw and scooped the little girl in with a charred tongue, gray coat and all, in horrible, unnatural silence, Michael pushed the dawning truth into his subconsciousness and believed with all his heart that it was a mistake. And it was a mistake as the second child was seized. And it was just carelessness as the third was taken. And it was a tragedy as the fourth met the same fate. But when the creatures at last turned to him, smiling widely with human teeth, eyes pale pinpricks in their narrow faces, the truth washed over him, as cold and bitter as a bucket of ice water thrown over his head to wake him. The uneasiness he'd felt when his name was called to walk the path, multiplied by 1,000. Fractured images flooded his brain at top speed, and he understood his mother's strangled gasp as he was chosen was not of pride. He understood the stories of mysterious intruders long, long ago who reached down chimneys and ate what they pleased, and why those stories were shushed by the village leaders. Michael understood everything, but it was too late for him. The red scarf, carefully tied by his mother that morning, crumbled to the snow as a blinding pain shot through his consciousness, leaving it in two. Everything. If you didn't look, really look, you couldn't tell the creatures from the trees. So a casual observer walking the path would see nothing strange, nothing out of the ordinary. It would, perhaps, come upon the red scarf, spill onto the snow, pick it up, maybe, and wonder. They'd wonder. I don't know how to feel about that story. It leaves you with a feeling of unsettlingness to think that, these children, we don't exactly know their age, but we understand this kid is able to understand what's happening, but still trust his leaders enough to make the right decisions for him. So I'm going to imagine him as like the age of 8 to 11, somewhere in there. And kind of to just have these things. I was actually looking at an SCP thing earlier today about creatures like this, and it's called them Wendigos or whatever, who wore deer skulls and were long like trees and had the same traits as these guys. They just had deer skulls on their head. But yeah, it's kind of something that reminds me of that. They just eat children whole. These skinny things will pick them up, unhinge their jaws, and put them in their mouth. Kind of a creepy thing to think about, but still cool nonetheless. I wasn't that scared by it. Wasn't that good of a story in my opinion. I like ones that kind of leave me, as more scared. But it's still half decent. I'd give it a 5 out of 10. Now our next story is called Gut. It was written on November 29th, 2020 by William Harmar. Gotta be honest, I think the worst day I've had all year was the day the voice in my head told me to keep running. I'm not schizophrenic or anything. I mean it in a more gut feeling sense. The day it screamed at me to keep going, to sprint as fast as I could in the direction of home, was the day everything went. I jog every night. I like the cool air that a sunless sky brings, and I like how there aren't many people around. I don't really gel well with the neighborhood. A lot of nuclear families and sheltered suburban homes. The neighbors gossip and chat across picket fences, have barbecues with each other's families, and can probably remember the names of each and every person on their street. I live on my own and barely talk to anyone, so I stick out like a sore thumb. I hear people whisper about me behind the fences as I pass by. I'm some sort of creep. That mom was a paragon of neighborlessness, and I was just waiting for her to die. It's bullshit, of course. I would love to leave if I had a job that paid enough, but I don't. I work in a Walmart where I bag groceries, stock shelves, and get paid dirt, so I'll probably never leave. Still, asshole neighbors aside, jogging is nice. The local area's got lots of really nice parks and everything's well lit, so don't feel particularly scared of being jumped. No jerks, no worries, no need to stay in the house and brood about it all. It's nice. Well, it was. As I mentioned, my gut kinda ruined the whole deal. I had a really shitty morning which transitioned into a really shitty afternoon yesterday. Heard the same old shit from the neighbors and a couple of assholes were yelling for my manager at work. They held me personally responsible for their favorite soda being in stock. I was ready to have a real long jog that night. I began my regular circuit, heading out the front door, down the street towards the park. There's this one bench by the entrance that I mark my progress by as I do a whole lap around the place. On a good night, I can lap past it at least 10 times. There was a guy sitting there last night. He didn't look like he lived in the neighborhood. In fact, the poor guy didn't look like he lived anywhere, really. His clothes looked ripped up, like he hadn't found some new ones in a while. He was sitting, smoking a cigarette, his back bending forward like a weight was hanging from his head. We noticed each other. I nodded at him, and he nodded back. A nice change. Usually people didn't respond when I tried to be polite. Either that, or they scolded. A nod was nice. In my first lap, the leaves in the trees on either side of the park path blew gently in the wind, a gentle white noise to numb the anger that piled up throughout the day. Past the little lake where a couple ducks slept, heads curled into their wings, back to the bench. The guy had begun to get into a sleeping position. He was rolling out a newspaper, and he placed his back at the end of the bench. We nodded again. Second lap. I noticed a little hum from lights that ringed the path this time. That, mixed with the wind through the leaves, created a gentle ambient soundtrack for the jog. The duck still slept. Back to the bench. He wrapped up. His head was on the backpack. I could imagine this was a rare enough piece for him. The air was cool, not too cold. It was nice. We could share in that piece here. Third lap. Humming lights. Brushing leaves. Nothing else but gentle noise. Who could worry about today on a night like this? It was so peaceful. I felt peaceful. No need for anger here. I could have jogged forever, and I'd be okay. I could be okay. I got to the pond. No ducks. They must have headed off to find a spot without the sound of jogging feet. Back to the bench. He was still sleeping soundly. Fourth lap. I listened to the hum in the wind. Or, I tried to. When it died down by now. The leaves were still. The lake was still too. No ducks. No ripples. Just the hum of the streetlights. It was quiet. Another passed around the bench. Like everything else, the man was still. He was enjoying the quiet. Fifth lap. No wind. No leaves rustling. No humming lights. No humming lights? I looked up. There they were, bright as ever, yet they made no noise. Not a sound. Kept jogging. The air was dead. Not a noise to be heard. save the sounds of my shoes hitting the path of my breathing. I was aware of it then, the way I was breathing heavier, a little harder than usual. I looked to the pond, saw nothing but the still water, and breathed a little heavier. And heavier. I was scared, I think. I didn't know why. It wasn't like the stillness was going to kill me. It just felt wrong. Like the night's heartbeat had stopped. I was breathing harder as I rounded the bend and headed back towards the bench, where I stopped in my tracks. I listened. I could hear something else. Something in my breathing. Took some air in and held it. Something else was breathing with me. A hacking, moaning, breathing from across the... It sounded like a cat being strangled in slow motion. The guy on the bench. Maybe he was choking or something. I stole my nerves and kept jogging. As the bench got into view, I could see, clear as day, someone who wasn't there before. As the man lay sleeping, a woman, at least 7 feet tall, was leering over him. She wore this long, tattered dress, which frayed at the ankles. It was once white, I think. It now had gray, brown, and what looked to be red stains across the entire thing. It was like a horrific Jackson Pollock hung from her shoulders. I got closer. Her hair was as long, black, and slick as oil. I could see her shoulders rise and fall with every laborious breath, parting and closing the strands, revealing a long, pale neck. I kept jogging. There were 2 voices now. One told me to jog in the other direction. The other told me to get her the hell away from the sleeping man. The only guy I'd met in ages who hadn't thrown a judgment my way. As I got within tossing distance, all of a sudden, she stopped breathing. I stopped jogging. I stared at her, waiting for her to take another breath, for her shoulders to rise again. Seconds passed. 10. 15. She had to breathe at some point. I opened my mouth to get her attention. Before I even let out a sound, her head jerked, loudly creaking sideways like a door with a bad hinge. Turning, until I couldn't make out an unmistakable eye with strands. It was white. It was deep. And it was full of hate. Fucking run. The man was still there. Fucking run. Get the fuck away from it. Go, 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 go. She was going to hurt him. She'll get you next. Fucking run, you dumb fuck. Run, just fucking run. Just fucking... I sprinted to the left, through the park entrance. I couldn't look back. A deep, primal part of me that rarely made itself aware of my consciousness just knew, or sure, that that woman was going to kill me if I did. It told me to run. Run, and don't stop running until I was back home, in bed. So I did. I sprinted past the shop I worked at, past the police station, and to my front door. I fumbled with my keys, opened it, screwed my eyes shut as I slammed it closed. I stopped, waiting for a sound. The only thing I could hear was my own ragged breathing. I sobbed, pain tears dropping onto my floor as I stumbled against the door, let exhaustion and shock take me. The following morning I was awoken by heavy-handed knocks against the door. Jumping up, I squinted through the people, fearful of long black hair. I can't say that my attention was relieved when I saw a couple of police officers instead. I opened the door and they asked me if I could come in for questioning. Something about a person that had been found the previous night. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and got in the car. I didn't care where I was going or what they wanted. I was just thankful that I was alive, that my gut had guided me right. A few things happened next, which eroded that sense of thankfulness. First of all, the man in the park, the one with the woman, dead. He was on the bench, white as a sheet, deep handprints bruised into his neck. I wonder now, as I did in the interrogation room, if I could have saved him. Second, the police pinned it on me. They told me that security footage of the park entrance showed the man walking in about 20 minutes before I did. Then 20 minutes after I arrived, I sprang out of the park. Part of me was desperate to tell them the truth of things. They never mentioned 7-foot-tall horror appearing in any footage. But I couldn't. I couldn't let them get away with it. 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 and these guys seemed pretty made up in their decision regarding my innocence. Finally, my goddamn fucking neighbors. When the police had talked to them, they'd gone on and on about how I was antisocial, a bad egg, some scumbag who only left home past midnight to skulk around and look for trouble. They were so fucking positive about how I was some nutcase that I'd been desperate to meet someone somewhere secluded for years, just waiting for the chance to kill. So they threw me in a cell, and it was all because my gut told me to run, to sprint home, not to tell anyone or call the police or to stop the creep from hurting that poor guy, but to run. Fucking coward. They told me that in the morning my attorney was going to arrive, and that I was set up to go to court within the week. At least they obliged me when I asked for some paper and a pen. I felt like I needed to get all this down. Initially, I wanted to get my story straight. Maybe work with what I remembered to make a halfway convincing lie about what happened. Now as night rolls in, for another reason. My gut's acting up again. Ever since I sat down, it's been tightening. A voice in my head telling me to. Thought maybe the horror of being sent to prison for something I didn't do was setting in. Now I'm thinking differently. My gut is telling me to run. To break out of the cell and run far, far away. Because that ragged breathing outside the window is a little too familiar. There are two voices again. One's telling me to make a commotion, to scream for a guard, maybe to try and pick the cell door with a loose bobby pin in my pocket. Another voice is tempting me to look out the window, telling me that it's just a raccoon or something. I'm overreacting. But that other voice rebuts with a pretty convincing retort. It's telling me that if I did, I'd be looking into white, hateful eyes, hidden behind black, messy. Now that is a very, very, very well written story. Because at the beginning, as soon as I heard the knocks on the door, I knew it was policemen, obviously. That's just how these stories are written. But he wrote it in such a way that you could feel the fear of this tall lady that he was scared of. And you can only imagine what was going to happen to him in that cell as he died from her, most likely. That was a really good story. Not much to really build on top of on it. Did a really well job. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Now our third and final story of the night is called The Farmer and the Scarecrow. Posted on November 18th, 2020 by Jesse Crawley. I killed my best friend when I was 13. It wasn't what I wanted, or what the others involved wanted. That doesn't matter now. He's gone. Most people look back at their childhood and realize there was a day they went out to play with their friends for the last time without realizing it. That's not the case for me. Andy was my friend since we were in kindergarten. Growing up, we were inseparable, always sitting together, playing on the same team, reading the same books, and playing the same video games. The teachers even had to make us sit with other kids from time to time so we couldn't distract each other during class. Nothing could keep us apart, though. Not for long. I had a twin sister, Penny, who was shy and always wanted to tag along with me, rather than try and making friends of her own. I told Annie that she would be joining us when we hung out, and Annie was just fine with that. In first grade, we got seated with a kid named TJ, and Annie told me we should spend more time with him. I didn't argue. By the time we reached 4th grade, another boy joined the crew after we were put into a group project together. His name was Billy. He was shy like Penny, and never talked unless you spoke to him first. Penny liked him, and we accepted Billy into the group with open arms. That was as big as the group would get, and we spent the next 4 years seeing each other as much as we could. We studied together, played football together, and of course when Halloween came around, we went trick-or-treating together. It was the Halloween of our 8th grade year when something happened that would change our lives in ways we could have never predicted. We went trick-or-treating together just like we always had before. We'd gone as the Ghostbusters that year, with Penny as our ghost. Afterwards, we came back to my house for a sleepover, where we traded candy, watched a scary movie, and finally settled in past our bedtime for spooky stories. This was the part that Andy had been the most excited for. Billy was happy just to be with us and opted to listen. TJ tried to make something up on the spot about a mummy at a museum, but it ended up being more funny than it was scary. Penny and I didn't really have anything, and Andy was too eager to wait to tell his anyway. "I have a good one for you guys tonight," he told us, pretending to crack his knuckles. "But be warned, it's really scary. You may not even be able to sleep." I remember saying, "Well, it can't be worse than TJ's, so go ahead. Do your worst." Andy smirked back at me in that moment and gave me an affirmative nod, which I see much differently back. "Okay, but no lights. Everyone listen close," he told us. We gathered our favorite pieces of candy and turned off the lights, circling up with only the sound of Andy's voice to keep us company. He told us a story about a scarecrow on a farm, and it still gives me chills to this day when I remember how easily he slipped into the story, never stumbling on a single word. The scarecrow lived its days tied to a post in a cornfield, unable to scare the crows away and failing at its only purpose in life. Crows mocked him for it. They would land on his post and peck at him, cawing in his ears. They thought nothing of him except when they thought to torment him. One night, it became too much for the scarecrow, and he began to weep. He cried so loudly that the farmer came outside to see who was trespassing his property, only to find the weeping scarecrow. "Please," the scarecrow begged the farmer, "please let me down. I can't take it anymore." "Let you down?" the farmer scoffed. "You have a job to do. You don't come down until the crows are gone." With that, the farmer went back inside and the crows returned the next morning. It taunted him further, cackling and boasting. Not even the farmer cared a thing about him. They pecked away at the corn. They pecked away at him, tearing small bits of his body away. The scarecrow sobbed louder than ever, but he was drowned out by the amused crows. He tugged at his restraints, thrashed his head desperately. The crows were not dissuaded from their feast or their cruelty. Finally, after hours of tugging and torment by the cursed birds, the scarecrow pulled himself free. In his anger, he grabbed the nearest crow and crushed it in his hand. The others flocked him, trying to rip him to pieces with their beaks and their talons, but the scarecrow fought back. He killed one crow after another, till only a handful remained. They fled the field in terror. Freed, the scarecrow brought the dead birds inside and offered them to the farmer. "The crows are dead," he told him. "I've done my job." The farmer was surprised, but he was glad to see it. He gathered up the crows and plucked their feathers, cooking them up for dinner like they were his own chickens. The farmer decided he liked the taste of crow so much that he wanted more to come back. He wanted the scarecrow to stay on the post and to kill more for him to eat. The scarecrow kept his end of the bargain, but the farmer had broken his promise. As the farmer sat at his table with his hands over his full belly, the scarecrow lost his temper once more. He grabbed the knife and fork and drove them into the farmer's eyes. As the farmer screamed in agony, the scarecrow dragged him from his home and nailed him to the very same post in that cornfield. "Please," the farmer cried, his eyes still gauged by the bloody fork and knife, "please let me down. Let me go." The scarecrow stood before the farmer, watching the blood drip from his face and hand. "Not until the crows are gone." Andy never said the end or anything like that. He just let us sit in the dark with what we heard. When he turned on the lights, we didn't even move. And he looked at us with this big, curious grin. "What'd you think?" We all told him it was a good story, unsure what else to say. We decided we were ready for bed. Can't remember how long it took me to fall asleep, but I remember how my eyes flipped towards every little sound until I did, as if my mind was creating noises that didn't belong. When I finally did drift off, sleep proved no escape from the story. I dreamt about the scarecrow with a bloody knife and fork in hand, while the screams of the farmer echoed throughout the dark woods wherever I ran. Dead crows littered the ground at every turn, and my path became blocked by the wooden post, waiting for me to be stuck to it next. That was when I woke up in the next morning. I went into the bathroom to try and calm down away from the others, only to find Penny sitting by herself, tears streaming down her face. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me that she had the same dream. She didn't just have a nightmare about the same Scarecrow. She had the same dream as I did, scene for scene. As if the nightmare weren't frightening enough, seeing my sister in such a state and hearing that our dreams were mirror reflections of each other nearly made me fall down. Andy had to leave early that day, and after his mother picked him up, I asked TJ and Billy how they slept. Penny and I were distraught when TJ described exactly what we'd seen without us telling him our dreams first. I remember looking at Billy while TJ talked, and seeing the color drain from his face as he heard his own nightmare described by someone else too. None of us knew what to make of it, but we were scared. Next time I saw Andy, I asked him if he had the same dream. He said no. "It was just a story," he told me. "I'm sorry for scaring you guys, but that was kind of the point, you know?" I didn't feel like it was fair to be mad at him then, but that didn't stop me from developing a fear of the dark. When the lights were out, I felt like I was brought back to the moment he told us the story, and I would panic before turning the light back on. It made it harder for Penny and I to go to sleep, but when we slept, the nightmare would come back. It was the same one every time, inescapable, no matter what we tried. TJ and Billy were no better off, frightened of their own shadows from then on. TJ even started bringing a knife to school, and Billy went from speaking only when spoken to speaking at all. I started finding it nearly impossible to focus at school. My mind was always ended up wandering back to the Scarecrow, imagining the pain the farmer went through on that post. At church, when they talked about Jesus on the cross, I saw the farmer instead. I even prayed for protection from the Scarecrow, imagining him when the pastor said, "Deliver us from evil." Part of me wanted to talk to Andy about what was happening. Since he was the one who scared us so bad, I felt as if it would be no use. All of us ended up talking to him less, and when he asked what was wrong with him, it was Penny who said that his story had a number on us. I remember him rolling his eyes and saying how it was just a story, and that we were making too big a deal out of it. Andy was always in my corner for anything before then, so to hear him be so dismissive about it made me resentful. After a few weeks, it got so bad that I began to lose control. Every night that dream kept haunting me, so every day got worse. One day at school, the teacher called on me to answer a question when I hadn't been paying attention. It was the third or fourth time, and she scolded me in front of the class for always being distracted. I snapped at her and said a few things that got me sent straight to the principal's office, and I had an excuse for my behavior that they would believe. My parents decided it was a result of violent video games and movies, so they limited my access to those things and told me to spend more time outside when I wasn't studying. I lived in a rural area with plenty of farms and wide open fields, so going outside was effectively like throwing me into the lion's den after the onslaught of nightmares. As if to pour salt on the wound, a flock of crows showed up near my property one day. They scared me so badly that I took my dad's BB gun from the shed and began to shoot at them. Every time I missed, I got so frustrated that I felt like my head would explode. I screamed at the crows to go away, like a kettle finally brought to boil. They didn't leave. They just kept calling away, like they had when he tried to make them. At this point, I'd had enough. One weekend, on a night when our parents were away for conferences at school, I called TJ and Billy over. We talked about what was happening. Each of us kept having the same nightmare ever since that Halloween. How our grades were all suffering because we couldn't think of anything but that story. How Andy was doing just fine. "He did this to us," I told them. "Andy did something to us, and he has to undo it." TJ agreed with me right away, as if he'd been waiting for someone else to say it first. Penny and I had confided in each other enough that she was willing to passively follow my lead, and I had taken full advantage of it, getting her to offer no resistance to whatever I wanted us to do. Billy was even more easily swayed. All I had to do was ask him if he was in, and he gave me an affirmative no. TJ asked me what the plan was. and I felt there was no time to wait. We get him to make it stop, said definitively. We do it now. I called Andy and told him to meet us at the edge of town, where the dirt road ran by a vacant farm. There was no traffic out there, no one to see or hear us. We'd always wanted to camp out in the field, so I told Andy that night we were finally going to give it a try. He agreed right away and said he'd meet us there, and 4 of us grabbed our bikes for the ride. I was barred from the shed after the BB gun incident, but I had left his toolbox in the garage, so I fished out the hammer and 2 nails before leaving. It was cold that weekend, and it was even starting to snow when we were halfway there. Andy suggested we turn back at one point rather than freeze, but we were determined. I often wondered how things might have turned out if we listened to her. When we got to the dirt road, we saw Andy waiting for us by an old box elder tree, shivering next to his bike. We wasted no time telling him about the dreams and that we wanted them to stop. "That's what this is about?" he asked incredulously. "It was just a story, you guys. I told you that." That wasn't good enough. The 4 of us blew up on him, surrounding him with his back against the tree and demanding that he lift the curse. He was like a deer in headlights, frantically looking between us and trying to get a word in, but we wouldn't let him. We'd finally come completely undone, unable to control ourselves in a fit of panic and rage. I shoved Andy against the tree and told him to make the dream stop, or else. "I can't!" he screamed back, shaking with terror and cold. "You're all crazy! Let me go!" Saying that I couldn't make the dream stop just made me more frantic, and I told TJ and Billy to hold him against the tree. Andy tried to fight, but they took an arm and pinned him there, while I took the hammer and nails from my jacket pockets. Andy screamed for help, but we were the only ones to hear him, and we weren't listening. I approached my best friend as he begged us to stop, put 1 nail to his right palm, and hammered it in. He screamed so loud that my ears began to ring. The ringing almost drowned out his scream as I nailed his left hand next, stepping back with TJ and Billy as Andy was powerless to follow us. When we had left the house, I imagined putting those nails in his eyes, but turning him into a scarecrow must have been enough. A nearby flock of crows had taken to the air when he screamed, and we watched them fly away until we couldn't hear them anymore. Annie got on her bike in tears and rode away as fast as she could, while TJ and Billy insisted we should do the same. Can't remember much else about that moment, only that we ended up dumping Andy's bike in a ravine before heading home. The search for Andy started the next day, and the 4 of us gave the police our pre-rehearsed story about how Andy never showed up to our proposed get-together. I wasn't stupid. I figured they would find him and they would come for us. Strangely enough, I was wrong. Police looked all over the country, with their search dogs and local volunteers, but they found nothing. The end of the year came and went, and there was no sign of Andy, dead or alive. It was all over the news, and our school held a vigil for him when the search was eventually called off. Andy just disappeared. He was gone. There was no trace of him left behind. The dream stopped haunting us too after that, and we clung on to the belief that we'd done the right thing. All we really knew was that we traded one evil for another, and a new batch of nightmares awaited us. Our group's friendship didn't last long after that. Billy stopped talking to us after a while. He was the last to join our group and the first to leave. TJ got expelled during our junior year when the school found drugs in his backpack along with a 6-inch blade. Even Penny and I started to grow apart. By the time we were seniors, we hardly spoke to each other. Our parents just wrote it off as life's natural changes at that age. The crushing loneliness I felt after that was enough to make me question if life was worth living. I was left with nothing but my own thoughts, and I wouldn't have wished those my worst enemy. Near graduation, when Andy had been all but forgotten and life was as normal as I could hope for, I started wondering how all this was possible. The way he just disappeared was so confounding, to say the least. I started to wonder if it possibly could have been real, the way I remembered it. On the 4-year anniversary, the day Andy was killed, I walked all the way out to that dirt road in search of the box elder tree where we'd left him. I don't really know what I was expecting to see, or to hear, or to even feel. It wasn't like there was much of anything that could bring me peace or closure after what I did. I walked up to the tree, just to put my hand on the bark, to feel the body of what was meant to be Andy's final resting place. When I did, I saw the nails still planted right where I'd hammered them, darkened by age and rust, and by what looked like old traces of blood the years hadn't managed to wear away. Even after leaving town, starting a life far away from that place, I'll sometimes find a weekend to go back and visit that tree. The nails are still there, waiting for me, every time. All these years later, I find that I'm no less haunted than I was back then. It keeps me up at night, wondering where Andy went, why they never found his body, or whether he might still be out there. The Scarecrow was able to pull itself from its restraints and exact vengeance on its tormentors. To this day, I live in fear Andy might do the same thing. That story was amazing. Hands down, awesome. That has to be a massive oak tree, elder oak, sorry. My bad. For him to be able to be nailed up on it and keep his arm straight, and then not even be able to pull his hands off the head of the nails. Part of it just doesn't make sense, but hey, it's part of it. It's very scary. I don't know why killing him made them feel better about himself. It just doesn't make sense to me, and why the curses went away and stuff like that. But that's also the point of creepy stories. That was an amazing written story as well. Even better than the last. This one gets a 9 out of 10, I think. But with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff down below. Make sure to tune in for our Christmas special edition on Christmas Eve. If I don't post another one before then, which, I might if the reception on this video as well. It has been your boy Dr. Zyme, and I'll catch all y'all later. Peace.